Welcome to Dungeon Academics. My name is Thomas and I will be your instructor. There is a large problem in Dungeons and Dragons, and by that I mean you can't play large player species in the game. There's an abundance of small species that one can play, and a cornucopia of medium, but nothing that really satisfies the itch of playing a big bruiser. Something like an ogre, minotaur, troll, any one of a number of creatures from European myth and legend, and honestly, history and myth from around the world brings us a wealth of creatures larger and more dangerous than humans. Now, Dungeons and Dragons does have some larger than human species you can play. Things like Goliath, Bugbear, and Firbolg all tower over humans. But it's not an ogre, it's not a troll, it's not a minotaur. There have been many attempts by independent creators to make rules for large player species in the game, and none of them quite do the job that I want them to. So I think it's time for me to give it a go as well. And this video will discuss some of the ideas I'm having on this ongoing project. The first thing that needs to be clarified is that these rules must be absolutely optional. I'm from the school of thought that says it's completely okay for a dungeon master to outlaw a spell, a species, an entire class, depending on the campaign that they are going to run. There can be cases where the abilities of a particular species or class or even a spell can undo one of the core mechanics of the campaign you want to run. If you are running a game of gritty survivalism, having a spell that produces an unlimited amount of food or water, or functionally unlimited depending on your party's needs, then that really undermines part of the campaign that's critical. So ban it. Ask your players, hey, pick something different. Don't use that spell because it will break the game. In the same way that many dungeon masters don't like flying player species because it makes you have to rebalance all combat encounters. Now that's not so much a big ask for an experienced dungeon master with plenty of time to plan. But if you're either in a rush or new to the game, having flying player characters can seriously change the nature of combats. Wolves, for example, a pack of wolves with some direwolves thrown in is a very dangerous encounter for low-level players that can't fly. But players that can fly really don't care. So outlawing anything from a dungeon master is okay. And if someone wants to play a large player character, this is definitely something a dungeon master will have to take into account. The mechanics for larger player characters are going to be more powerful in combat. Now, there are ways to mitigate this and to play into the character's strength that allow them to enjoy this class fantasy, but this is optional. I talk in this video about vibe, narrative, and mechanical reasons, and it is okay to ban an entire class or species based on these. If you're playing in a campaign where large creatures are common in society, then they already fit into the vibe. That's not a problem. On the other hand, if you're playing more of a grim fantasy, having large player characters may be very out of character. I know a lot of people like their Dungeons and Dragons to be a mixture of medieval fantasy and Lord of the Rings, and having humans, dwarves, elves, and hobbits is fine, but having some of the more fantastical or animal-based player character species doesn't fit. So banning large player characters would also be appropriate in that setting. Alternatively, there might be narrative reasons why large player characters are not necessary or inappropriate. If you're playing a game where a village is constantly being raided by a tribe of ogres, then having a player character wanting to play an ogre would be inappropriate. Or, on the other hand, you could write that into your story and have someone switch sides and now be defending against their previous ogre raiders. You know what? That's up to the dungeon master. But if they want to say no, that's okay. And finally, mechanical reasons. Yes, large monsters make more powerful player characters in combat. I am going to try and find reasons to balance this out mechanically, but if the dungeon master doesn't want to interact with that, that's fine. So these rules are going to be completely optional. Now, when I was thinking about these rules, I wanted to take into consideration why a player might want to play a large species. And I broke this down into 3 reasons that I've already mentioned: vibe, narrative, and mechanical. I personally like building characters where the vibe, the narrative, and the mechanical line up. All 3 are important to me. I often start with one and then figure out how to incorporate the other 2 into that. But I know plenty of people that play based on 1 or 2, and that's okay. Now let's look at vibe. Why do people pick a character based on vibe? Well, it's just something they like, and that's okay. I know that tieflings are a very popular race to play because people like tieflings. Tieflings are cool, they're different, they are a little bit edgy, and you know what? That's a perfectly good reason to pick a tiefling. I would wager that elves have become considerably more popular in Dungeons and Dragons, even though they were popular before, because of the characters of Baldur's Gate 3. A lot of people whose first contact with Dungeons and Dragons was Baldur's Gate 3 may have come across Astarion and said, you know what, that's a pretty cool character, I want to play something like that. And that's fine. Building your character on a vibe is a fun way to play the game, and there's nothing wrong with that. Narrative reasons. Well, people like telling stories. If you have a story to tell, or that you want to make with your dungeon master, that involves a particular player species, go for it. So you can pick a character based on a story, and that's fine. Now, there are some people that pick their characters based on mechanical reasons. If you look at a lot of the optimizing channels, they pick their class, their background, and then their species to see what species have advantages that line up with what they want their character to be able to do. And you know what? That's absolutely fine as well. It happened with me. I had a bard that I loved playing, but I found that in combat it was somewhat lackluster. It was powerful, but I didn't feel like I had much agency. I would drop a powerful control spell and then just be casting 1 cantrip a turn with very minimal effect. I didn't like that. It wasn't a case that the character wasn't powerful enough for me. It was a case that I wasn't engaging enough with the game. I didn't have as many interesting choices to make in combat. And I changed that. Part of it was picking a different species. I found that goblins were absolutely fantastic for this because they come with a built-in bonus action that lets them do something useful. So I could cast a spell as an action and then do something interesting as a bonus action and be moving around all the time, and I had a lot of fun. The vibe and story were quite similar, but mechanically it was very different because of the species that I chose. Choosing a species based on mechanics, that's okay. What I tend to find is that the game is most enjoyable when you combine all 3 together. That's really important to me. And if it's not important to you, if you just want mechanics or vibe or story, that's okay. There's 1,001 good ways to play Dungeons and Dragons. And just because the way that I enjoy it is different than the way that someone else enjoys it, doesn't make my way better or worse. So, large characters. What is the vibe of a large character? If you wanted to play a troll or an ogre based on vibes, well, you want to play a big bruiser. You want to play the biggest person in the room, literally and metaphorically. An ogre has presence. Wherever they go, they get attention. And that's a great reason to play a large character. That physicality, it's cool, nothing wrong with that. What about narrative reasons? Well, there could be 1,001 narrative reasons to play a large player character. Is this a raider that's had a change of heart? Someone that's lost from their tribe? Someone who's gone on an adventure to recover something? Any of the stories that make a normal, medium or small Dungeons and Dragons character interesting might potentially work for a large character. Stories are your own to tell, and if you can work out a good story with your dungeon master, of course, then playing a large player character could be a very interesting take. It would definitely be a fish out of water, well, potentially be a fish out of water story, because if you're in a society that's primarily medium and small creatures, playing that large creature is going to get you noticed. Things are going to be very different for you. So narrative, plenty of good reasons to play a large character. Now, mechanics is more my thing. Mechanically, why do people want to play a large player character? Well, they hit hard and they have a big tank of hit points. That's what you expect from a large character. If you look at the monsters in Dungeons and Dragons, the bigger they are, the harder they hit, and the more punishment they can take before they go down. And that should be carried over into the mechanics of large player species. So there are plenty of good reasons to play a large player character. And the rules that you write, well, I'm going to write for this, should line up with those vibes. If the vibes and the rules line up nicely, you end up playing a character that you enjoy. Now, it's okay to play a character where the vibes and the mechanics go in completely opposite direction. That can be great fun. If you play the large, powerful bruiser who's got a kind heart and a gentle soul, that's a great way to tell a story. But this is up to how you interpret your character. And that's the fun of the game. Okay, so how can we balance out large player species? Like I said, the mechanics are going to give them some quite significant advantages. They are going to be hitting harder. They're going to have more hit points. But there needs to be something that balances this out. Something that happened in previous editions of Dungeons and Dragons was negative ability score modifiers on character creation. If we look at early 5th edition, each species would have a +2 ability score attached to one ability and a +1 attached to another. This became a little bit more flexible with the introduction of Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and I think that was a good step. Before, and in previous editions, there were negatives attached to certain ability scores that told you something about those species. For example, a species might have a negative intelligence modifier because they weren't considered as smart, or it might have a positive strength modifier because they were considered stronger. Now, this has been changed and taken away. Yes, there are still species that are stronger and weaker. Mechanically, that's included in the rules. Small creatures get disadvantage when using weapons with a heavy tag, and large creatures can get the powerful build, which gives them bonuses to strength and doubles their carrying capacity. So a Goliath with a strength 16 and a halfling with strength 16 are still going to be different. The Goliath can carry a lot more weight and can hit harder because they have access to heavier weapons. But taking negative ability score modifiers away was a good move. If a halfling had a negative strength modifier, that would somewhat limit the player choices and what classes they could play. Playing a halfling barbarian when it comes with a negative strength modifier is nowhere near as fun. Playing a half-orc wizard, if a half-orc had a negative intelligence modifier, would not be as good. Removing negative modifiers allows characters to build the story with the character that they want to. And I think this is absolutely fantastic. Now, player species do have abilities that perhaps line up with their stereotypical use. A half-orc hits harder in combat and is more resilient because of their abilities, but not their ability scores. This, I think, should carry over to large player species as well. I'm not going to be giving them different ability score modifiers on character creation. You use whatever system you currently use. If it's 5th edition from 2014, it's a +2 and a +1. If it's the 2024 version, it's based on the background that you pick. And I'm not going to change that. I am going to be giving them abilities that tie into their ability scores, which encourages players to place the highest values in a certain way. So I've been spitballing about ideas on how to give them more hit points and hit harder. And if I base the number of hit points they get not just on constitution, but also on strength, you are encouraged to put constitution and strength as your highest ability scores, but you can still go intelligence if you want. If you build a very intelligent ogre with the intent of playing a wizard, you can do that. But by not putting the higher ability scores in strength or constitution, you are somewhat reducing the bonuses that they get from their size. And that's okay. That's a player choice. They're not being punished for putting ability scores outside of the physical ones, but they would be rewarded for playing into stereotype. And I'm okay with that. I think that's fine. Now, like I said, I think characters work best when the mechanics and the vibes line up nicely. Because of that, any penalties that I put on large player species can't undo the bonuses that they get. Now, if we look at existing rules for large creatures, they are somewhat spread out through the rulebook and the Dungeon Master's Guide. Most important, I think, for this endeavour is the bit in the Dungeon Master's Guide about creating large monsters and the use of oversized weapons. And it tells us that a large creature with an appropriately sized weapon should be doing double the damage dice. If a greatsword does 2d6 damage, a Minotaur with a greatsword should be doing 4d6. And that's a really simple way to deal with it. In addition to that, there are other rules for player characters who become large. If you use the Enlarge Reduce spell, you get a bonus of d4 to all your weapons, which have increased in size with you. I don't think this is meant to be in addition to the oversized weapon rule. This is just a, hey, add a d4 to all your damage rolls. The ability that comes with the Rune Knight, where you become larger, gives you a d6 damage bonus on one attack per turn. Now, assuming that you have more than one attack per turn, d4 on each attack is a lot better than d6 on one attack. And the fact that the two rules are different is somewhat perplexing. Added into this is the Path of the Giant Barbarian. Now, there isn't strictly a damage increase with becoming large when they become enraged. They get the Elemental Cleaver rule, which adds a d6 of elemental damage to each attack, but that is independent of whether you become large or not. I mean, when you go into a rage, you have the option of becoming large when you reach a certain level, and you also get d6 damage from the Elemental Cleaver. But if you don't become large, you still get the damage boost. What you do get is an increase in reach. So we now have 4 different rules that all say something slightly different. Oversized weapons say double the damage. Enlarge Reduce says plus d4 to each attack. Rune Knight plus d6 to one attack. And Path of the Giant Barbarian, no damage bonus, but you get a reach bonus. How confusing. I think I'm just going to make it simple and use the oversized weapon rule. That means that your weapon does double the damage dice if it is appropriately sized. So a standard short sword is now doing 2d6 instead of 1d6, and if you pick up a great sword meant for a normal human, you know what, that feels like about the right size for a short sword for you. And it did 2d6 for the normal human, and it does 2d6 for you. That's fantastic. You just don't need both hands to wield it now. An appropriately sized greatsword would be 4d6. Now that is quite a significant boost to damage. But, and here's the important thing, if you have any knowledge of the history of maximizing damage, if you look at any of the optimizing channels, you will know that very high damage characters have so many different sources of damage that the actual weapon damage is a comparatively small part of that. Adding 2d6 damage to each attack, that's an average of 7 damage per attack more. And if we're comparing it to characters that are already doing 150 damage per turn, it's it's not a huge boost. It is a boost, nonetheless, and we can't ignore that. But it's not a game-breaking boost, and that's the important thing. In addition to that, we want our large player characters to have more hit points. They are bigger and they are tankier. They may end up having worse armor because procuring good armor when you're that big is going to be difficult. Let's not worry about that right now. But we do expect them to have a big pool of hit points. With that in mind, whatever counter rules we give them to somewhat reduce this cannot go directly against the vibe of hitting harder and having more hit points. We want our character to turn up to battle and to be big and strong. And if they're not big and strong, then why are we playing them? But we do need to counter this somehow. We do need to balance it out. So what can we do? Well, I had some thoughts about this. What if we mess with their ability to heal? What if we reduce it? What if we make healing harder for bigger creatures? And what if we tie this somewhat into diet and food? Now, excuse me, please. I did a very quick bit of research on the internet, and very roughly, an animal's calorific intake scales proportionately with its mass. If we compare humans and horses, a horse might weigh 5 times as much as a human, but it also has 5 times the calorific intake. Now, an ogre might be twice as tall, twice as broad, and twice as deep as a human, making it 8 times the mass. That means ogres would have at least 8 times the appetite of a human, possibly even more. I'd round it to 10 to make life a lot easier for the mathematics. I can imagine that an ogre is perpetually hungry, and because of that, it makes it harder for them to heal. They have to be well fed to heal properly, and we can change the way that healing works to reflect this. So we're adding a bit of narrative and storytelling into the mechanics of the rules, and I quite like this. It's really important to me that a mechanical rule that gives you a bonus over other player characters should also have a mechanical disadvantage. If we just said ogres need to eat more food, well, that's not a mechanical disadvantage. That's a storytelling and role-playing disadvantage. You have to spend more gold to mitigate a boost that we're getting in combat. That doesn't feel right. But if we change the way that healing works for them, now there is a mechanical disadvantage that affects tomorrow. So today you get to enjoy being a big, strong tank, but tomorrow there might be a price associated with it. Healing is really powerful in Dungeons and Dragons, and people often say the exact opposite, that healing magic is incredibly weak. But I'm not talking about healing magic. I'm talking about long rest healing. When you long rest, you recover any lost hit points. In addition to that, you recover up to half your maximum hit dice that you've used throughout the adventuring day on healing. If you had, let's say, a level 10 character with 100 hit points as a maximum, and through the day they've used all of their hit dice to heal and have somehow managed to survive on 1 hit point, when they take a long rest, they will get 99 hit points back from healing, and they will get 5 hit dice back added to their pool. As a general rule, the number of hit dice you need to recover all of your hit points is 1 plus your level. So for a level 10 character to go from 1 to maximum on their hit points would require 11 hit dice. If you've recovered 11 hit dice in a long rest and get 5 more back from your pool, That's 16 hit dice of healing in one go. The general formula is 1.5 times your level plus 1 hit dice. What if we restrict this? What if we change it so that ogres, or any large character, don't do any healing as part of a long rest, but recover a number of hit dice equal to their level? They fill up the pool, the hit dice pool, and any left over are rolled straight away and added to your hit points, but without any modifiers added to it. This means it's quite likely that your ogre or other large character is not going to start the day on full hit points. That makes short rest healing really, really important. And we can tie that healing into how much they're eating. I imagine that large characters have an enormous appetite. If they are standard, if there's standard food available, nothing special, nothing meager, just normal food, you could say that when you heal, you roll your each hit dice and add your constitution modifier. If the rations are sparse, if they're not eating well, if they're foraging or there isn't enough food, they just roll the hit dice and don't add any modifiers. On the other hand, if they're really well fed, there's a banquet, there's roasted meat and plenty of ale to drink, then great. They can add their constitution modifier and something else, maybe strength, maybe proficiency, to get even more healing done. This means that ogres and other large creatures are constantly looking for food. Every time they short rest, they want something to eat, some proper food, not iron rations. They want to roast a deer or catch a few big fish, and they're not really prepared to share them. How a dungeon master would define well-fed or poorly fed is up to them, and this adds a little bit of work for the dungeon master because they're now having to pay more attention to how well the characters are eating at short rest. But I think short rests are a better opportunity for storytelling than people take advantage for. So if you're now including more activities in your short rest, it's not just, I take a rest, get some points back, let's carry on going, but instead it's an opportunity to do other things as well. That changes the balance of the game, and I quite like this idea. One thing I'd like to add is that I don't want to force all large player characters to play carnivores. I know plenty of people who, by religion or personal choice, don't eat meat, and therefore forcing a player character to eat meat to heal doesn't feel right. I've played a game where I had a character played by a vegan player, and they asked me before the game in the session 0, can we not have depictions of cooked meat because it made them queasy? And you know what, I was fine with that. Not every fire needs to have a suckling pig roasting on a spit. Not every tavern needs to smell of roasting chicken or freshly fried bacon. It's okay to say a hearty stew. So changing what the definition of a hearty meal is perfectly fine. The idea is the player character well fed, or are they poorly fed, or is it just standard meal rations? And I think this is an actual nice way to change the balance of the character. You have a character with a huge pool of hit points, but they have trouble filling it up. And if the party can work together to keep that tank full, it's an incredibly powerful team asset. But the team will probably have to work together for this. And Dungeons & Dragons is supposed to be a team game. So having a player character that's relying on the rest of the party to keep their strength up, I think it's a great storytelling opportunity. So, yeah, I think that's what I'm going to do. The characters hit harder because they used oversized weapons, and they have a bigger tank of hit points, but they have trouble keeping that tank full unless the party's working together to make sure they're well fed. That's how I'm going to build large characters. Now, over the next week or so, I'm going to try and get these ideas down into a document and include a few sample large characters that people can play. I'm not going to include the centaur on this list. There are already rules for centaurs in Dungeons and Dragons that are medium creatures. And although a centaur has the torso of a horse, and horses are large creatures, because of the way I'm building these rules, that the large creatures are tankier and stronger, that doesn't really feel like centaurs to me. Centaurs are fast, they are fleet creatures. The rules represent them dashing in and out of combat, moving around very quickly, and I think the rules work well for that. Sure, you can't have another player character riding a centaur unless that other player character is playing a small creature, but centaurs don't give the same vibes with their size as a minotaur or an ogre would. So leaving centaurs as medium works for me. I'm certainly going to do ogre. In fact, I've used ogre as a synonym for large creature far too many times when other large creatures exist. Trolls, playing a pure troll doesn't really sound right because they are not the brightest of creatures, and even by Grog Strongjaw standards, a troll is a dumbass. So a demi-troll, that's a possibility. Minotaurs, of course, and there are two flavours of Minotaur. There are the mindless, blood-raged creatures and the gentle guardians of the forest. So including both of those Minotaurs seems like fun. And some sort of ent-like creature. They fascinate me too. So there's at least 4 creatures I want to try and include in this document. Now, I'll try and get that written up. That'll take me a while, so stay posted for updates on this. I recently posted my first subclass, which I really enjoyed making, the Path of the Trollsbane Barbarian. That was good fun, so I'm hoping this project will be just as rewarding. So stick around if you want to find out more about them, and enjoy your next game, whatever it may be.